Silence is loud out here. But the cold is louder.
How long can modern humans survive in complete isolation before their minds begin to break down under the pressure of silence? We are accustomed to thinking that survival depends on food, warmth, and reliable shelter, but the history of polar expeditions proves otherwise. In 1898, Carl Linn was left completely alone on an icy coast when his ship left, only to return the following spring. Around him stretched hundreds of kilometers of lifeless ice desert, where temperatures dropped below 40 degrees and the polar night lasted for months. He had no radio communication, no hope of outside help, and every day turned into a monotonous battle with death. Linn realized that the main threat came not from bears or frost, but from his own mind, which in the silence began to conjure up monsters. This is not a story about the heroic conquest of nature, but about the cruel discipline that allows one to retain one's humanity in inhuman conditions. Watch this video to the end, and you will learn what simple but harsh habit saved Carl Linn from the madness that had destroyed many experienced polar explorers before him. What if I told you that the moment when a ship disappears over the horizon is scarier than any storm? Carl Linn stood on the shore and watched as the only thread connecting him to civilization dissolved into the gray icy mist. At that moment, time stood still for him, dividing his life into before and after, where the future became foggy and frightening. The realization that he was completely alone did not hit him all at once, but came in waves, becoming heavier with each passing hour. He understood that any cry for help would be heard only by the icy wind, and no one would come to his rescue. The first hours of loneliness were filled with feverish activity that helped drown out the panic. Linn began to move supplies into the hut, checking every box and every bag of food. He counted the cartridges, matches, and kerosene with maniacal precision, realizing that every unit of these resources was now more valuable than gold. It was not just an inventory, but an attempt to create the illusion of control over a situation that was completely beyond his control. As dusk fell, the silence became palpable, pressing on his ears with its absolute density. In the normal world, we never hear true silence. We are always surrounded by the background noise of cities or nature. Here, however, the absence of sound seemed unnatural, as if the world had frozen or died. Linn could hear only the beating of his own heart and the crunch of snow under his boots. He lit a kerosene lamp, and this small flame became the center of his new universe. Shadows danced across the rough wooden walls, creating bizarre shapes that reminded him of home. He sat down at the table and opened his diary to make his first entry, recording the beginning of his solitary confinement. It was difficult to write. His hands trembled, not from the cold, but from the nervous tension that never let up for a second. Linn understood that many who had stayed here before him did not live to see spring, not because of hunger, but because of insanity. Loneliness in the Arctic is not just the absence of people, it is the complete absence of external stimuli. Deprived of the information it is accustomed to, the brain begins to consume itself, creating hallucinations and fears. He had to build a wall between his consciousness and the emptiness around him. He decided that he would not allow himself to relax for a minute, even when fatigue would knock him off his feet. Discipline had to replace his companions, superiors, and family. He promised himself that he would follow a strict routine as if he were serving in a large garrison. This decision was the first step in his survival strategy. That first night, he lay awake for a long time, listening to every sound outside. The wind began to pick up, testing the strength of the walls of his small shelter. Linn lay in the dark, imagining a map of the area and trying to plan his actions for the coming weeks. His thoughts were confused, returning to the departed ship, but he forced himself to think about the matters at hand. In the morning, he woke up from the cold that had crept under the blankets, despite the stove that had been lit the night before. It was the first morning of his new life, and it greeted him with a gray, joyless light. Hundreds of similar mornings lay ahead, each of them carrying uncertainty. I'm very interested to hear your opinion on this situation. Which do you think is worse? Physical cold or the complete inability to talk to another person? Write about it in the comments. Are you ready to learn the truth about how an ordinary wooden shack becomes a complex engineering structure? A polar explorer's hut is not just walls and a roof. It is a complex life support system where every detail is critical. Linn understood that his survival depended directly on how effectively his dwelling would retain heat. Standard wooden siding could not withstand the Arctic winds, which could blow away the heat in a matter of minutes. He had to turn his hut into a real fortress using snow and materials at hand. First, he worked on the exterior insulation, building thick walls of dense snow around the house. Snow is an excellent insulator if it is properly compacted and formed into blocks. Linn worked methodically, cutting even bricks from the snow and laying them along the wooden walls almost to the roof. The snow armor protected the house from the piercing wind and created an air gap that kept the heat inside. The entrance to the hut was equipped with a special vestibule to prevent cold air from rushing into the living area when the door was opened. This cold zone also served as a storage area for tools and outerwear, which was always covered with snow. Linn never entered the living area in his outdoor clothes so as not to bring moisture inside. Dampness was another deadly enemy that had to be fought daily. In the warmth, the snow on his clothes melted and moisture saturated everything around him, promoting mold and rot. Linn constantly dried his clothes over the stove, making sure that the air in the hut remained as dry as possible. The floor of the hut was the coldest place, and it was impossible to walk on it without shoes. Linn covered it with several layers of wood and skins, but the cold still seeped in from below, from the permafrost. He trained himself to keep his feet elevated when sitting at the table or repairing equipment. Lighting in the hut was scarce, and Linn conserved kerosene, using it only during the darkest hours. During the day, while it was still light, he tried to do all the work that required visual strain by the small window. The window was triple-paned, with layers of air between the panes, but it was still covered with a thick layer of ice patterns. Every item in the house had its own specific place so that it could be found even in complete darkness. Chaos in everyday life could lead to the loss of an important tool or a waste of time, which was unacceptable in extreme conditions. Order became part of his defensive strategy against the entropy of the surrounding world. Thus, his hut was transformed from a temporary shelter into a complex mechanism that supported life. He knew every creak of the floorboards, every draft, and every feature of his stove. But even in this fortress, he could not hide from the main threat: eternal darkness. But the cold was nothing compared to what was coming from the sky. In the next chapter, you will learn how the absence of light changes human physiology. Want to know a secret that will change your understanding of discipline? Linn's most dangerous enemy was not hypothermia, but the loss of sense of time, which leads to the breakdown of personality. In conditions where the sun stops rising and night lasts for days, the human biological clock breaks down. Without external reference points, it is easy to confuse day with night, start sleeping for 20 hours, or conversely, suffer from exhausting insomnia. Linn understood that if he allowed himself to live by feel, he would very soon lose touch with reality. He created a strict, artificial schedule for his life, which he followed with fanatical precision. He had a mechanical clock, and it became his main boss and commander in this empty world. He got up at exactly 7 a.m., regardless of whether he wanted to sleep or not, and regardless of the darkness outside the window. Getting up was not just a physical action, but an act of will, confirming that he was still human. Even his meals were strictly regulated and turned into a ritual. He set the table, used cutlery, and ate slowly, savoring every bite, even if it was just salted meat. This helped maintain normal digestion and created a sense of normality and comfort. His schedule included time for mental activity and note-taking. He described the weather, his observations of nature, and his physical condition in detail in his diary. This helped him analyze the situation and notice the slightest changes in his surroundings. Reading the books he had brought with him was also strictly rationed, no more than a certain number of pages per day. He stretched out the pleasure so that the books would last throughout the long winter, and so that he would always have something to look forward to tomorrow. Books were his only companions, and he often discussed what he had read aloud with imaginary opponents. Before going to bed, he would always summarize the day and plan tasks for the next morning. This gave him a goal and a reason to wake up, linking one day to another in a continuous chain. Without this planning, the days would have merged into one gray, endless mass. Linn forced himself to go to bed at the same time every night, even if he couldn't sleep. He would lie in the dark, counting seconds or recalling details from his past life to train his memory. His sleep schedule was critical to maintaining his mental health and physical strength. This artificial order was the framework that held his psyche together amid the chaos of the Arctic. Discipline became his religion, and the clock became the altar he worshipped daily. He survived not because he was stronger than others, but because he was more organized. If you agree that discipline is the key to success in any endeavor, like this video. Guess how many calories it takes to simply not freeze to death? In the Arctic, food is not a pleasure, but pure fuel necessary for the body's internal furnace to function. Linn quickly realized that his supplies were finite and that winter could last longer than planned. He had to become an accountant for his own body, meticulously calculating his energy intake and expenditure. Hunting became not a sport, but hard work necessary to cover his energy deficit. He set a network of snares and traps around his camp, checking them on a strict schedule. It was passive hunting, which required less energy than actively pursuing prey in deep snow. Linn knew that every extra kilometer traveled burned precious calories that were difficult to replenish. His main prey was Arctic foxes and ptarmigan, whose meat was tough but nutritious. Linn learned to use every part of the animal, throwing nothing away. The skins were used to repair clothing and provide warmth, while the fat was used for lamps or as a food supplement. He learned to trick his hunger by drinking lots of hot water and chewing his food thoroughly. The feeling of fullness was a rare guest, and he constantly felt a slight, sucking emptiness in his stomach. But he forbade himself to overeat, even when the hunt was successful, stretching his supplies. Sometimes blizzards prevented him from checking his traps for several days. During such periods, he went into hibernation mode, minimizing physical activity and spending more time in bed. This allowed him to conserve energy when it was impossible to replenish his supplies. Hunting was also a way to stay connected to reality and feel like a living creature in the food chain. It gave him a sense of purpose and accomplishment. He set a trap, he caught food, he survived another day. The simple, cruel logic of nature was easier to understand than complex human emotions. Survival became an equation where the variables were temperature, calories, and luck. Linn solved this equation every day, and the price of a mistake was maximum. But even a full stomach could not protect him from what was happening outside. How do you think a person feels when the sun sets below the horizon and does not return for months? The polar night descended on the earth like a heavy, impenetrable curtain, shrouding the world in darkness. This is not just the darkness we are used to at night, it is the complete absence of sunlight for several months. The sky became an endless black dome studded with cold, indifferent stars. Linn found himself trapped in a world of shadows, where the only sources of light were the moon and the aurora borealis. The psychological pressure of constant darkness was enormous, causing a condition known as polar depression. Deprived of sunlight, the body stops producing serotonin, leading to deep depression and apathy. Linn felt his strength melting away and his desire to do anything disappearing with each passing day. It took a Herculean effort just to get out of bed. His vision sharpened in the darkness, but his brain began to play tricks on him. filling in images where there were none. Linn often saw movement in the periphery of his vision, figures standing in the distance that dissolved as soon as he turned his head. The darkness seemed like a living, tangible substance trying to penetrate the hut. The aurora borealis, which tourists consider a beautiful phenomenon, looked ominous to the lonely winterer. Giant green and purple stripes shimmered in the sky like silent ghosts dancing over his grave. Their light was cold and dead, offering no warmth or hope. During these months, he hardly ever went outside unless absolutely necessary, as the risk of getting lost in the dark was enormous. Even 100 meters away from the hut, one could lose their bearings and freeze to death while searching for the door. He always tied himself with a rope when he went out in a blizzard. His sense of time had completely blurred, and only the clock reminded him that somewhere it was daytime. He lived in eternal twilight, where the line between dream and reality was blurred. His dreams became vivid and restless, often featuring the sun and green grass. The lack of ultraviolet light also affected his physical health. His skin paled, his gums began to bleed, and his joints ached. Linn felt his body slowly withering away without the life-giving energy of the sun. It was a slow decline for which he had no cure. The polar night was a test not for the body, but for the soul. It took away all hope and joy from a person, leaving only the bare instinct of self-preservation. Linn knew that he had to endure this darkness, otherwise it would become a part of him forever. Are you ready for the shocking truth about what kills fastest in the Arctic? We are used to thinking that the polar explorer's main enemy is extremely low temperatures, but in fact it is sweat. In severe cold, any moisture on the body or clothing turns into an icy shell that draws heat from the body at a catastrophic rate. Linn knew the golden rule of the North: if you sweat, you die, so his work became an art of slow movement. He learned to control his pace of work so that he never overheated. If he was chopping wood or clearing snow, he did so at a measured pace, stopping long before sweat appeared on his forehead. He had to constantly take off and put on layers of clothing, regulating his body temperature manually. This required constant attention to his sensations. Drying clothes became an evening ritual on which the next day's life depended. Everything from socks to gloves had to be dried over the stove to perfection. Linn hung his clothes on special ropes under the ceiling where the warmest air accumulated. The slightest moisture in the fabric in the morning could lead to frostbite on his fingers an hour after going outside. Hygiene in such conditions seemed an impossible luxury, but in fact it was a necessity. Dirty skin and clothes retain heat less well and become a breeding ground for bacteria. Linn arranged bath days, washing himself with hot water in the heated hut despite the cold outside. Washing clothes was hard work, requiring a huge amount of water and firewood. Linn boiled melted snow in a large vat, turning the hut into a steam room. Then the wet clothes had to be dried for days, which increased the humidity in the room. This endless war with water and ice was no less exhausting than hunting. Linn was caught between the need to stay warm and the danger of overheating. The balance was fragile, and any violation could cost him his health. Moisture was an insidious enemy that penetrated everywhere and waited for mistakes. But while Linn had learned to cope with physical threats, mental threats were much more difficult. Survival depended on small things, but how long could one remain sane in a complete vacuum of communication? After several months of isolation, Linn noticed something strange. He had started talking aloud. At first, it was just short comments about his actions. "I need to add some wood," or "the weather is getting worse." But soon these phrases turned into full-fledged monologues and even dialogues with himself. The silence was so unbearable that his brain demanded at least some sound of human speech, even if it was his own. He began to read books aloud, acting out scenes and changing his intonation. This helped him remember the sound of words and created the illusion of other people's presence. The walls of the hut absorbed his voice, but gave no response, which sometimes caused fits of rage or despair. Linn gave names to everyday objects, turning them into companions of sorts. The stove had its own character, capricious and demanding, while the lamp was a loyal but voracious friend. This animation of inanimate objects is a classic defense mechanism of the psyche in conditions of loneliness. Sometimes he thought he heard voices outside, in the sound of the wind. These were auditory hallucinations, his brain trying to find patterns of speech in the chaotic noise of nature. Linn would run outside, sure that someone had come for him, but find only an empty, icy desert. His diary became his main confidant, to whom he entrusted his darkest thoughts. On paper, his fears seemed less frightening and more concrete. Rereading his entries, he could assess his condition from the outside, like a doctor assessing a patient. The feeling of constant surveillance never left him, even though there was no one around. It seemed to him that the Arctic itself was watching him with thousands of icy eyes, waiting for him to give up. This paranoid feeling forced him to always be on guard. Linn sang songs, remembering all the melodies he knew from childhood. Singing helped him control his breathing, and the vibrations filled the emptiness inside his chest. The loud sound of his own voice was proof of his existence. Talking to emptiness was not a sign of madness. It was a way to fill the vacuum. Linn created the noise of life around him so he wouldn't hear the dead silence of eternity. He was both the actor and the audience in a one-man theater.
Silence is loud out here. But the cold...
By midwinter, food supplies began to dwindle, and Linn's body began to send out distress signals. The constant cold required a tremendous amount of energy, and even a successful hunt did not always cover the deficit. He began to lose weight, his movement slowed down, and constant fatigue became chronic. Linn realized that he was entering the most dangerous phase of wintering, the phase of exhaustion. He felt his body begin to eat itself, consuming muscle mass. It became difficult to lift heavy objects, chop wood, or even simply walk through deep snow. Every action required an effort of will, overcoming the leaden heaviness in his limbs. The first signs of vitamin deficiency appeared. His gums became loose, and any scratches took weeks to heal. Linn knew about scurvy and tried to eat raw meat and offal, overcoming his disgust. It was the only medicine available in these latitudes. Sleep no longer brought rest. He woke up exhausted, as if he hadn't slept at all. The cold penetrated his dreams, making them nightmarish and exhausting. He dreamed of feasts and tables laden with food, which made waking up even more painful. One day he was too weak to check the traps, and this was a wake-up call for him. He realized that if he missed another day, he might never get up again. The next day he crawled to the traps, literally forcing himself to move out of sheer stubbornness. He even started boiling leather belts and old hides, trying to get some kind of broth out of them. This soup didn't provide any energy, but it filled his stomach, fooling his hunger for a couple of hours. The taste was awful, but he had no choice. Linn dreamed of spring not as a season, but as salvation. He visualized the sun, warmth, and food, using these images as fuel for his mind. Only hope kept him on the edge of the abyss. It was a battle of attrition where human resources were pitted against the endless resource of cold. Linn was at his limit, but he had not yet broken. He knew that the darkest hour was always before dawn. At the end of February, the sky in the south began to brighten, heralding the end of the polar night. For Linn, this first hint of dawn was an event of cosmic proportions. He would leave the hut and stare at the horizon for hours, greedily absorbing every photon of light. The sky changed from black to dark blue, then to pink, and these colors seemed to him to be the most beautiful in the world. The appearance of the sun, even for a few minutes, caused a storm of emotions in him, even bringing him to tears. He felt the light physically touching his face, giving him warmth that he had not felt for months. It was like meeting an old friend whom he had thought was lost. He began to prepare for the thaw, clearing the hut of ice and debris that had accumulated over the winter. This spring cleaning was a symbol of renewal and preparation for a new life. He repaired his equipment, preparing for a possible encounter with people. However, spring also brought new dangers. The ice became less reliable, cracks and holes appeared, it became more difficult to move around, and the risk of falling into the icy water increased. Linn had to be extremely careful not to die on the verge of rescue. Psychologically, he was ready to meet civilization, but the fear that the ship would not come still sat deep inside him. He stared at the sea for hours, hoping to see smoke on the horizon. The wait became a new test of patience. Linn understood that he had changed and would never be the same person again. The Arctic had burned away everything superfluous in him, leaving only his core. He was no longer afraid of loneliness, realizing that he could survive in any conditions. The first ray of sunlight was not just a physical phenomenon, but a symbol of life's victory over death. Linn had survived the darkness, and now he knew that the worst was behind him. All that remained was to wait. The ship appeared on the horizon in May, when the ice began to recede from the shore. For Linn, that black silhouette with a smokestack was the most welcome sight in his life. He lit a signal fire that he had prepared in advance and waved his arms, even though he knew he would be noticed anyway. When the boat touched the shore, he did not rush toward the people, but stood and waited calmly, maintaining his dignity. The meeting with the crew was strange. The people seemed too noisy and fussy to him, and they smelled of something foreign. He had become unaccustomed to human speech, and at first had difficulty finding the right words, responding in monosyllables. His voice sounded hoarse and unfamiliar to him. The sailors looked at him with awe and fear, as if he were a man who had returned from the dead. They saw his emaciated face and sunken eyes, but they also sensed the inner strength that emanated from him. Linn had survived where many had perished, and that made him special. Leaving his hut, Linn had mixed feelings, the joy of liberation and a strange longing. This small wooden box had saved his life and become a part of his soul. He left it tidy and stocked with firewood, a tribute to the next person who might find themselves there. Returning to the big world, Linn found that the noise of cities and the hustle and bustle of people annoyed him. He retained his habit of discipline and solitude for the rest of his life. The experience of survival taught him to appreciate simple things: warmth, light, and silence. His story became a legend among polar explorers, an example of how spirit is stronger than matter. He proved that loneliness does not kill you if you have a goal and willpower. Linn did not make any great geographical discoveries, but he did discover the unexplored depths of the human psyche. The doctors who examined him after his return were amazed at his condition. Physically, he was exhausted, but mentally he was completely stable. His artificial schedule and iron discipline saved his mind from collapse. Carl Linn lived a long life, but part of him always remained there, in the icy desert of 1899. He knew the value of life and death better than anyone else. The Arctic did not break him, but hardened him, turning him into a man of steel. This story reminds us that the main battles take place not on maps, but within ourselves, and the one who knows how to control himself wins them. The story of Carl Linn is a harsh lesson that resources are secondary, while will and order are primary. He survived not because of luck, but in spite of circumstances, creating his own system of life in the midst of death. We often complain about loneliness or boredom in our comfortable apartments, forgetting what a person is capable of when they have no choice. Do you think you could stay sane after spending 8 months in complete isolation without the internet or communication? Share your opinion in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new stories about the limits of human capabilities.